You have two kids. The SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice of the University of San Francisco acknowledges our presence on the unceded land of the indigenous Ohlone communities and pays our respects to these traditional caretakers and elders, past, present, and emerging. It's our intention that this acknowledgement plays a role, however small, in a much larger process of confronting the past in order to create a not yet realized future rooted in justice. Welcome everyone to the second event of the spring 2024 semester of the USF SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice. Tonight we will learn with renowned civil rights and racial justice advocate Mr. Eric Ward, Northern California-based giant Kohenet April Baskin, and USF's own Professor Brad Onishi in an event titled White Supremacy, Antisemitism, and Anti-Black Racism, Origins and Intersectionality. My name is Aaron Hahn Tapper, and I direct the SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice, or JSSJ. I want to begin tonight by thanking JSSJ faculty and staff for their help organizing this event, in particular Victoria Farlow. Before introducing tonight's program, I'd like to take a brief moment to tell you about our extraordinary JSSJ work. Founded in 1855, USF is our city's first university. Our tagline, "Change the world from here," is the real deal. With 9,000 plus undergraduate and graduate students, US News and World Report says that we're the #1 most diverse campus in the country in terms of racial and ethnic makeup. An educational institution where 1/3 of our undergraduates are the first in their families to attend college. We estimate that 10% of our student body identify as Jewish and some 25% identify as queer. A premier Jesuit Catholic school, in 1977, we became the first Catholic institution in the world to endow a Jewish studies program. In 2008, we became the first university of any kind, Catholic or otherwise, to have an academic program formally linking Jewish studies and social justice. In 2019, we added yet another first to our renowned history by forming a new position on campus, that of rabbi in residence. And more recently, in fall 2023, we launched the country's first ever graduate level certificate program in JEDI and JSSJ. That's JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and JSSJ. This graduate program gives professionals the opportunity to learn from both scholars and activists, offering a blend of academic study and real-world application. It's run by Chell Mandel and MJ Abrams, both here tonight, and both of whom graduated from USF with minors in JSSJ. Clap. Clap it up. In the classroom, we offer a wide range of significant Jewish studies courses not found in other educational settings. Beyond the classroom, we offer unique events that are free and open to the public, such as tonight's event. Through the SWIG JSSJ program, we believe that education is the best long-term way to create systemic change. Whether one has the time to take a semester-long course or a mere few hours to hear from a single speaker, education is fundamental to making our world better, paramount in shining the spotlight on the margins, on oppressed communities who are mistreated merely because of their race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or another social identity altogether. The following are the other 3 JSSJ events we still have this semester. On Sunday, April 7th, we will have our 3rd annual Alvin H. Baum Jr. Memorial Lecture, which honors an LGBTQIA+ Jewish social justice activist. This year's lecture is entitled A View of the Epidemic, Seeing the Face of the Divine, and it will be delivered by Mike Shriver, who's been involved in HIV/AIDS advocacy, activism, program development, organizational development, and public policy efforts for over 30 years. This event will be held in Fromm Hall. Tonight's event is the second in a 3-part series on anti-Semitism. The 3rd event in the series, which will be held on Tuesday, April 16th, also in Fromm Hall, is entitled Anti-Zionism and Anti-Semitism, Compassion and Disagreement in a Time of Violence. The keynote speaker will be Leo Ferguson, social justice activist and longtime JFREJ, that's Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, movement building organizer. He will discuss the links between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism in today's political climate around Palestine and Israel. Following his keynote, Leo will be in conversation with local leader Rabbi Dev Noiley, senior rabbi of Kehillah Community Synagogue in the East Bay, moderated by JSSJ assistant professor and faculty Oren Kroll-Zeldin. And finally, on Thursday, April 25th, we'll have our 14th annual Social Justice Passover Seder, which will focus on anti-racism. That evening, we will tell the Passover story while making connections between the ancient narrative of moving from slavery to freedom and contemporary anti-racist activism. Our Seder will take place in this room, and all of these events will be held from 6:30 to 8. If you'd like to learn more about these events or sign up for our monthly newsletter, there's a sign-up sheet on the table found right outside. Now, on to tonight's program. Since I came to USF some 17 years ago, we in JSSJ have put on about 120 events, just like tonight. Interestingly, this three-part series on anti-Semitism encapsulates the series, the only 3 events we've ever run that focus on anti-Semitism. And this series was set up last spring. The first part of our series on anti-Semitism, which took place last month, our keynote was Jim Carroll and was titled Anti-Semitism in the Catholic Church, an Unfinished Moral Reckoning. As I mentioned at that prior event, though I function in the US on the daily as a white cisgender male, my Ashkenazi Jewish identity is core to my being. I've largely been comfortable as a Jew on this campus, and I've experienced anti-Semitism on this campus a number of times as well. Intent versus impact is a common mantra in social justice settings, and no doubt some of these anti-Semitic episodes were unintentional, but they most definitely caused me harm. And as an aside, all of these experiences predated this past fall. A common theme in these anti-Semitic experiences has been Christian hegemony, Christian dominance. Many people don't see the dominant and subordinated patterns that exist all around us. I've had many colleagues who have downplayed our campus's Jesuit Catholic bona fides, arguing that our campus is far too secular for their liking. Needless to say, one would be hard-pressed to walk onto campus from Fulton Street and not notice St. Ignatius Church. Christian hegemony, in dismissive quotes, is how one colleague recently reacted to my sharing with him some of the challenges I've had as a Jew on this campus. He also said I should be more grateful that our Catholic campus even has a Jewish studies program. I often wonder if he would have said that to a member of a different minority population. One of the core vehicles that continues to drive anti-Semitism take place in Christian communities. The largest of these sub-communities are Catholics, their official representative, the Catholic Church. Hence, this was the focus of the first part of our series. Another form of anti-Semitism that I've experienced on campus is rooted in a lack of understanding of what it means to be a Jew. I've had multiple conversations with people on campus who understand Judaism only as a religion, which they think solely means faith or a set of beliefs. Note that this too is commonly another form of Christian hegemony insofar as Judaism as a religion in relation to another religion is Christianity. Despite 20th and 21st century history to the contrary, some seem unwilling to think of the signifier Jew as malleable one, an identity that is an other to many groups, regardless of whether Jewishness is thought to be a religion, culture, ethnicity, nationality, or race. Tonight's keynote speaker, Mr. Eric Ward, will explain the deep connection between the otherization of Jews and the otherization of other minorities, such as Black Americans. Momentarily, we will begin tonight's event with Mr. Ward's keynote. Immediately afterwards, Mr. Ward will be in conversation with Kohenet April Baskin, moderated by Professor Bradley Onishi. I'll introduce Kohenet Baskin and Professor Onishi at this time. Kohenet April Baskin is an award-winning Black and Cherokee Jewish woman and ordained Jewish priestess who has been a dedicated organizer and movement leader within the Jewish community for 20 years. She has helped shift institutions towards more equitable outcomes within and outside of the Jewish world and is a faithful advocate of building just, diverse, and inclusive spaces that cultivate belonging and empowerment. She's the founding director of Joyous Justice and the Joyous Justice Collective, co-host of the Joyous Justice podcast, a founding steering committee member of the Jewish Liberation Fund, and a current leadership team member of Rise Up, Nurturing the Soul of Jewish Justice. She was the first racial justice director of the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable and served as the inaugural vice president of Audacious Hospitality at the Union for Reform Judaism, the largest Jewish denomination in the world. She has won countless awards for her work, far too long a list to lay out here. Professor Brad Onishi, who will moderate the conversation between Mr. Ward and Kohenet Baskin, is a social commentator, scholar, writer, teacher, and coach. He often speaks about topics related to the radical conservatism and extremist religions that shape our world, some of it right in our own backyards. Aside from teaching at USF, he is also the co-host of the Straight White American Jesus, or SWAJ podcast. And he can explain that later, but the podcast deals with the antithesis of that framework, i.e. not straight American Jesus. This podcast ranks in the top 50 of politics shows on Apple's podcast charts, ahead of programs for NPR, New York Times, and other national outlets. His most recent book is titled Preparing for War: The Extremist History of White Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next. Thank you both for joining us this evening, and April, welcome back to USF. As for our keynote speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce Eric K. Ward, a nationally recognized expert on the relationship between authoritarian movements, hate violence, and preserving inclusive democracy. Holding previous positions such as the executive director of the Western State Center and senior fellow with the Southern Poverty Law Center, he is currently the executive vice president of Race Forward, which works to dismantle structural racism by building collective community power and transforming institutions. Race Forward's work is predicated on the idea that Black and brown communities hold the key to solving the racial inequities in the systems that have long harmed the lives and communities of people of color. With more than 3 decades of leadership in community organizing, social justice, and philanthropy, Mr. Ward has written multiple works and has been quoted in widely read media outlets such as The New Yorker, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, and many more. Among his many awards, he earned the Civil Courage Prize in 2021 in recognition of his work in revealing the dangerous proliferation of hate crimes and political violence by authoritarian extremist movements in the U.S. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Eric Ward to the stage.
Let me do some adjusting of the mic here. There we go. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I promised I would only speak for about 20 minutes, which means 25. So settle in a little bit, but we're going to have a conversation about intersectionality and really about the political moment we find ourselves in. Race Forward begins its premise of its mission and vision with the idea that the moment we are in right now is not one over a struggle of belonging. In the eyes of Race Forward, the struggle over belonging ended in 1968. And whether white nationalists or those who still hold on to the vestiges of white supremacy, we're going to get a little adjustment. There we go. Perfect. Now I'm not killing the sound back there. Regardless of the fact that there are organized white nationalists and those who cling to the vestiges of white supremacy, their desire to turn the clock backwards, Race Forward has decided in its vision that there is no 2 out of 3. or 3 out of 5, that this is no longer a question of belonging, that the sole question on the table is, will this multiracial nation be allowed to govern, or will it not? This is the question that is being debated in our country right now. But it didn't start with the events of Charlottesville or the election of Donald Trump. Its history goes much further. Tonight, in my remaining 22 minutes, what I hope to do is to unpack the history of the Black radical project in America called democracy. How those who lost to the Black radical project needed to come up with a theory of change to explain the loss and to set the course of their backlash by landing on a conversation called antisemitism. And the third is to lay out possibly what's next for those of us who care about the Black radical project of democracy in America. I think often of this movement that started in 1954. You may have heard of it, the Civil Rights Movement. There was a woman who was very famous, Rosa Parks. The story goes, one day, Rosa Parks, this Black woman, was tired. And on this one day that she happened to be tired in America, this Black woman refused to give up her seat. She was arrested, and lo and behold, everyone in the Black community all of a sudden stayed off the public buses for an entire year. Like manna from heaven, they just knew through osmosis. Within a year, the Montgomery Bus Association simply decided that racial segregation was morally wrong, ended it, and everyone lived happily ever after. Now we know that is a myth. It's not how the story unfolds. In truth, Rosa Parks was a longtime organizer and leader, well respected in her community. She and others had been strategizing around how to challenge racial segregation as a challenge to building real multiracial democracy in America. She and others gathered in a place in Tennessee called Highlander, where they built their organizing strategy, figured out how to build allies both within and outside the Black community to wage a year-long campaign. The power of organizing is important. How we inspire one another in our communities. This victory symbolizes the civil rights movement. We have to understand, before the civil rights movement, white supremacy, a system of discrimination, was the single lens upon which we understood one another, our politics, our culture, and our economy. There was no competitor to white supremacy. Certainly there was resistance, but white supremacy held hegemony. White supremacy was built off an idea of white superiority that held this system of white supremacy together. The false notion of biological racism, that Black people were inferior and that white people were superior. White supremacy, when it was founded in this country, was founded upon 3 core pillars. The first, the stolen land and lives of indigenous peoples. The second, a unique system of slavery called chattel slavery, the exploitation of Black labor. The third, we often don't discuss, was the control of sexuality and the control of women, misogyny. These were the 3 pillars of white supremacy. It is what allowed our country to become one of the most robust economies in the world. But it was challenged. And before I talk to that challenge, I have to ask everyone to take a deep breath. I read this story once that even mentioning the word racism and white supremacy in the American public makes the heart increase. It raises anxiety. So racism, 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 white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy. Breathe it all out. It's okay. None of us were here to set up that system. None of us were responsible for that system. We are only responsible for what we choose to do with it now. So here is this system. And in the between 1954 and 1968, Black community members and leaders come together and forge one of the largest multiracial coalitions in this country. And it successfully challenges white supremacy. It creates an alternative, the idea of a multiracial democracy, an inclusive democracy that is people-centered, transparent, and accountable. Black folks wage a universal struggle. The Black radical project in America has always been centered around the idea of universal liberation. And that is why consistently in this country, when Black people organize for equity and rights, everyone tends to benefit. It is that Black radical project that defeats white supremacy as the legal law of the land. Now, I'm not here telling you this evening that white supremacy went away. As an African American, I can attest to the fact white supremacy still functions. But what I'm saying is that this Black radical project ensured that there was a competing narrative to white supremacy. Now imagine, as I said, white supremacy is based off the idea of superiority. Imagine for a second you are an arch segregationist. You have been socialized all of your life to see Black people as inferior. How do you come to understand this social defeat? Do you say suddenly, well, I guess I was wrong, Black people weren't inferior after all? That's not what happens. But there is a need to construct an idea that explains this loss in society. How the vestiges of white supremacy could be so effectively challenged on the streets and the courts of America. So those arch segregationists borrow from another narrative, a narrative that many of them had become familiar with as World War II soldiers in Europe, some because of a rich automobile industrialist by the name of Henry Ford. It is a story that was embedded in a false tale called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. The Protocols were an anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic, which I will get to in a second, story that purported to tell the tale of a Jewish conspiracy in Europe, a conspiracy to destroy white Christians in Europe. It was a tale that came out in the 1800s and began to spread in the early 1900s as democracy began to spread in Europe as well. It was spread, ironically, by Russian secret police who were concerned about the rise of democracy in Western Europe. The tale purports to tell this story of Jewish elders who gather in a cemetery at midnight to plot the control and the destruction of European Christendom, to the control of the banks, control of politics and culture. It is this protocols that eventually make their way to the United States into the hands of Henry Ford, who republishes the protocols in a series of essays that he called the International Jew, in his independently distributed newspaper that was sold in Ford automobile shops around the country, exposing hundreds of thousands of Americans to this anti-Jewish bigotry. In Europe, over 32 editions of the protocols were published alone in the period of Nazi Europe. But it had its spread in the early 1900s. It was an effective tale a popular narrative that repeated itself over and over. It didn't spread because it was poorly told. It spread because there were people who were willing to believe the narrative. The narrative is still popular today. In the 2000s, I used to point out a TV series that I used to love to watch. Many of you may have watched it or watched it in syndication, The X-Files. Now, before I talk about The X-Files, please do not walk out of here saying Chris Carter is spreading anti-Semitism. That's not the purpose of this tale. The tale is to discuss the power of unconscious narrative on all of our lives and how it fuses itself sometimes in popular culture, in politics, and economy in ways that we are not always aware of. Here's the story of the the X-Files. It's a story of two FBI agents who what? Discover a global conspiracy, an attempt by aliens to infect humanity with an alien virus in order to take them over. These aliens have created partnerships with businesses, global industry, government, entertainers to keep the public asleep to the conspiracy that is happening right underneath them. It is only these two FBI agents who know the truth. And their job is to wake up the rest of humanity to this coming destruction. If you understand the basic plot line of the protocols, you understand of the X-Files, you understand the basic narrative of the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. It is a tale that repeats itself over and over again in apocalyptic narratives, in alien invasion stories each and every year. But I want to go back to these arch segregationists in the 60s and 70s. How do they explain this significant loss in society without letting go of white superiority? And they find their answer in anti-Semitism. For them, the answer becomes they didn't lose to this well-organized, multiracial campaign to bring equity and opportunity to America. They lost instead to a Jewish conspiracy that sought to use Black people as nothing more than puppets of their Jewish puppet masters in order to destroy white Christianity. It is a narrative that has repeated itself since the end of the civil rights movement. You find it embedded in the Great Replacement theory, the idea of a secret elite at work seeking to destroy the destroy the nation of the United States by what? In the words of white nationalists, flooding America, right, with Latinos, Arabs, and others. The secret elite, often indirectly referred to as Jews. We have seen the direct violence of that anti-Jewish hatred. Not only the attack on the Tree of Life, targeting Jewish worshipers, but the targeting of Latino shoppers at a Walmart in El Paso, African Americans worshiping in a church in Charleston, African Americans shopping at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, Latinos and others celebrating at the Gilroy Garlic Festival here in Northern California. And the list goes on. Now, I'm not here to say that racism, anti-Black racism, or anti-Latino racism, or Islamophobia were not part of the equation. What I'm here to tell you is that in each case, the killer believed that they were waging a war against a Jewish conspiracy. They named it in their own writings. The truth is that anti-Semitism has become not only a danger to the Jewish community, but also non-Jews have become victims to this anti-Semitic violence in this country. Why do I call it anti-Semitism, and why do I distinguish from anti-Jewish bigotry? There are lots of forms of anti-Jewish bigotry. Anti-Jewish hatred is one of the oldest forms of bigotry in the world, excepting one, that thing called misogyny. Anti-Jewish hatred has been with us for generations. But I argued in Skin in the Game that anti-Semitism was a new form of anti-Jewish bigotry that had taken root and become the main form of anti-Jewish hatred and its expression in our society. What was unique about it? Well, if we go back to the protocols and that period, what we understand is that this form of anti-Jewish bigotry, anti-Semitism, did not place Jews as a religious other or an ethnic other. It defined them as a racialized other. It is why I argue that anti-Semitism is also a form of racism. And for those of us who are committed to uprooting racism, it is our duty to challenge anti-Semitism as well. It is this explanation that allows these arch segregationists to reconstruct themselves into another movement called white nationalism. If white supremacy was about a system of control and exploitation, white nationalism became another agenda. If white supremacy was written upon the paper of anti-Blackness, white nationalism was written upon the paper of anti-Semitism. White nationalism, in short, does not seek to take us back to the days of Gone with the Wind or make America great again, despite the great hats people like to wear. The truth is that white nationalism as a social movement seeks to do away with the old system of white supremacy. It sees it as a failure. It argues each and every day that if white people hadn't adopted white supremacy, it would not be facing the challenge of a multiracial America today. Its answer to what is to be done is not to go back to that system of exploitation, but to engage in a tactic called ethnic cleansing, the removal of people of color and Jews from the body politic altogether, to remove them from the territories of the United States. In short, white supremacy is a system of exploitation. White nationalism is a social movement. White supremacy seeks to exploit, and white nationalism seeks to remove. The power of white nationalism is growing in this country. We saw it express itself on January 6th in the nation's capital, almost toppling the idea of democracy, a fledgling, ineffective democracy, but the best democracy we have won at the hands of Black people in this country. What we have to understand is that the white nationalist movement is willing to use both violence and electoral means to achieve its ends. It is a revolutionary movement that seeks to undo the United States of America and replace it with something else. The narrative of anti-Semitism drives it each and every day. From 1995 until about 2003, I spent hundreds of hours with the white nationalist movement as an African American. If you want to know how I was able to move about within those places, it was by adopting the veneer of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism was the universal Rosetta Stone that allowed me to enter into conversations with white nationalists. It is the fuel that animates the white nationalist movement. But here's the kicker. It also allows white nationalists to hold on to white superiority. They do not have to acknowledge the legitimate grievances or the agency of Black people or of feminists. or of immigrants, or even poor working white people. It merely needs to suppress it into this anti-Jewish conspiracy called anti-Semitism. With one fell swoop, anti-Semitism makes invisible the goals and the desires to live in a society grounded in equality, where everyone has the right to live, love, worship, and work free from fear and bigotry. But here's the other catch. White nationalists aren't musicians, are magicians. They don't create songs or narratives out of thin air. White nationalists do not bring anti-Semitism into our communities. They merely organize the anti-Semitism that already exists. Like any good organizer, you understand that you cannot move people around something they don't already kind of believe or accept. White nationalists exploit our inability to confront and address anti-Semitism to our own peril. So where does this leave us? In my opinion, we are in a significant moment in this country. We are in a moment where we doubt the power of the Black radical project, not just white nationalists. I think about my friends in the midst of the Black Lives Matters movement who wore shirts saying, "Not my mama's civil rights movement." I loved it. It had like kind of a little kick to it. But the truth is they were right. We don't live in my mother's civil rights movement. My mother's civil rights movement was badass. My mother's civil rights movement had to figure out how to organize and build power in a society that restricted and did not even acknowledge their own humanity at all. Not just by behavior, but by the rule of law. And yet these people came together and forged the strongest democracy that this country has ever held on to. Now, we can disregard it. We can pretend that they didn't struggle to bring us to this very point. We can act as if what we are witnessing is not a backlash. But that makes us very similar to the anti-Black attitudes held by segregationists and white nationalists, the discounting of Black struggle in this country. We can decenter it each and every day if we choose to, just like white supremacy and white nationalism. Or we can choose to believe that the Black radical project of democracy matters and that it needs all of us to step up and defend it. But to step up and defend it means building a toolbox that understands how anti-Semitism is being used and manipulated to attack democracy, to understand the importance of centering the fight against anti-Blackness at the same time, to understand that white nationalism is not merely an extension of white supremacy, that it is its own social movement with its own goals and desires, and that we need tools to deal with the systemic discrimination of white supremacy and develop tools to manage the threat of white nationalism. It calls on us to lean into real, nuanced, complex leadership, to get off of Twitter, to stop being walking memes on TikTok, and begin knocking on the doors of our neighbors, our colleagues, and having real discussions about the inequality that exists in this society and what we choose to do about it. And not only just the inequality, but the vision of the future. What type of society do we want to live in? What does it mean when we say, what does it mean to be American? We understand what the alt-right and the white nationalist movement means when it says, make America great again. There's not a single person in this room who cannot describe or imagine what that looks like. But when we talk about inclusive democracy, When we talk about a multiracial society, what is it that we mean? And how do people begin to sense it? It doesn't happen unless we begin to practice, unless we lean into governance, moving policies and practices that allow people to taste what the future looks like. Without tasting that future, people will always choose the past, what they know, even if it's worse than an unknown future. If we ignore the natural anxieties that come with change, if we treat it with an arrogance, we miss an opportunity. My father often tells the story, and I promise I'm coming to a close here, about a woman who thought something was wrong with her arm. And she went to the doctor to see what was wrong with her arm. The doctor looked at her arm, said, nothing's wrong. On the way home, she stopped at the butcher to get some meat. And the butcher asked her how she was doing. She said, I'm okay, but I have a concern. I feel like something's wrong with my arm. But the doctor said there was nothing wrong. And the butcher said, oh, I hope your arm feels better. About 3 months later, she still thought something was wrong with her arm. She went back to the doctor. Doctor looked at her arm, and the doctor said, there's nothing wrong with your arm. On the way home, she stopped at the butcher. The butcher asked her how she was doing. 2 months after that, she really thought something was wrong with her arm, went to the doctor again. Doctor said, there's nothing wrong with your arm. Why do you keep coming to me talking about your arm? About 3 months after that, she went back to the doctor again. Doctor looked at her arm and said, I don't want to see you hear any more about your arm. On the way home, she stopped at the butcher. Butcher said, how are you doing? And she said, I really think something's wrong with my arm, but I don't know what it is. And the doctor says he doesn't want to see me anymore. And the butcher said, well, since you first told me, I went to the library and I checked out some books on surgery. Now, I'm not a surgeon, I'm just a butcher, but I'm willing to give it a try. My dad likes to look up when he tells me the story and says, so son, what does she do? Does she keep going back to the doctor who won't give her any time? Or does she take her chance with the butcher? This is the moment we need to understand that we are in. People are filled with demographic anxiety. It doesn't make them white nationalists. It means that they are a constituency that we have to figure out how to engage and compete for. We have to understand that we have to begin organizing like folks did in the 1960s. The steady knocking on doors and building of the beloved community. We have to begin to show people what the future looks like and that they have a place in that future, lest they choose the butcher of white nationalism. Take anti-Semitism seriously. It's easy to ignore it. We have been socialized all of our lives to ignore it. Just as arch segregationists were socialized all of their lives to see Black people as not human. It doesn't make people bad. It is simply how we are raised. We have to spend less time worrying about who is the anti-Semite and more time focused on what is anti-Semitism. How do we explain it? How do we help people see it? Finally, I'll leave you with this. The white nationalist movement won't win because they're better organizers or more resourced or more creative. They'll win because we choose not to provide an alternative. It is our job to provide that alternative. It doesn't have to be just in politics. It can be in culture, it can be in arts, it can be in business, in law, in medicine. But our job every moment is to walk in the Black radical project of inclusive democracy. We used to play a game when I was a kid called If I Were. We'd sit in a circle out in front of our apartment building, and we'd do this thing. If I were driving down the freeway and the brakes went out, here's what I would do. And then we'd argue about how we get out of that situation. If I were in the zoo and the lion got out, here's what I would do. The question that came up every year was, if I were in the midst of the 1960s civil rights movement, here's what I would have done. Now, we were young kids and we were full of bravado. We were pretty sure about what we would and wouldn't put up with, what we would and wouldn't do. We didn't understand the choiceless choices of our parents and grandparents who grew up under Jim Crow. We were pretty confident about how we would show up. You may have your own if I were's and histories, but that question has always haunted me. How would I have shown up in the midst of the 1960s civil rights movement? Well, I'm here to tell you, you don't have to wonder anymore, and neither do I. The truth is however you would have shown up in the 1960s is exactly how you will show up when you walk out this door today. Make it count. This is our moment to make real the challenges and the struggles of those who came before us. This is our chance to be the prophets of a future yet with us. But we have to be courageous enough to step up. We have to be courageous enough to stand up and stand out. And more importantly, we have to be willing to learn about systems of oppression and discrimination that are unfamiliar to us. And the one we should talk about today is anti-Semitism. So thank you. I look forward to the conversation, and I'll see you out there in the 21st century civil rights movement.
Oh, all right. Well, first of all, Eric, thank you so much for a challenging, an insightful, and an inspiring set of remarks that no doubt will lead to an incredible discussion. We only have a couple minutes to kind of respond and discuss and really ponder what Eric shared with us. So here's what we're going to do. As we get going with our discussion, there are 3x5 cards available. So if you have a question, we're going to ask you to go ahead and take one of those cards and write down your question. They'll be passed up, and we'll have a chance to read some of those questions and present them to you here in a few minutes. Before we do that, and before I invite April to jump in here, I want to just ask you a question, Eric, that I get asked all the time. And I spend my days studying white Christian nationalists, which is a strange career choice, I think, sometimes. But it's one in which I get asked a lot about white Christian nationalist people professing unending love for Israel and yet adopting what are often anti-Semitic myths, stances, policy positions. You shared with us that anti-Semitism is a new form of anti-Jewish bigotry because it does not place Jews as a religious or ethnic other, but a racialized other. I'm wondering if one way to explain the seemingly contradictory love for Israel, but anti-Semitic position is one that says we're willing to be Judeo-Christian in religious terms, while also viewing you as a racial threat and a racial other with whom we do not want to live.
Yes. It's the contradiction of anti-Semitism, right? The placing of Jews in binaries that in the mind of the anti-Semite make perfect sense. It's why you see the Jewish community be accused, right? Being all capitalist at the same time as being all communist, right? And I can go on the list, right? Jews are seen as cosmopolitan and universal, right? But yet like close-knit, right? And standoffish. It is those types of anti-Semitic narratives and captions. In short, anti-Semitism places Jews into any position that answers a society's anxieties and fears. The piece around Christianity and white Christian nationalism is that its anti-Semitism is buried in something called philo-Semitism, right? And again, not unique to just Christians, right? We hear this in other facets. And the easiest way to explain philo-Semitism, it's the same thing that we see. It's a reverse form of positive racism is the best way. Black people are so articulate, right? Black people are amazing athletes, right? Jews are good with money, right? It's that philo type of Semitism that's so dangerous. And for Christianity, let's be clear that philo-Semitism is the idea that Jews will sacrifice themselves, right? In a global nuclear war in the Middle East.
Not me.
Right? Good. Right? In order to fulfill Christian prophecy. So it's not love for Israel. It's the love that Israel will play in that segment of Christianity's fantasies that are based in apocalyptic scenarios.
One of the ways that I often think of conspiracy theories as permission structures for hatred, for fear. They're stories that give people a reason to indulge the fear and hatred and other impulses. One of the things that I took away from what you said, Eric, is that anti-Semitism is a double whammy because it gives people permission to continue to believe in the inferiority of black people and the organizing power of the Black Radical Project, and permission to hate Jewish people and fear Jewish people who live with and among them. April, I'm wondering if this is a moment in terms of what Eric shared with us that might reveal the ways that there have often been false choices and barriers presented around the ideas of black liberation and fighting anti-Semitism, as if it's one or the other, as if one might have to choose between one project or another, liberation here or liberation there, is thinking about anti-Semitism and opposition to the Radical Black Project in the ways that Eric has presented, help reveal that those really are false choices.
That's me breaking expensive microphone equipment.
It is a false choice, so much so that I just want to do a total pivot. And thank you for that wonderful question. And as the founder of Joyous Justice, I'm not even quite sure how I want to bring in joy, but I want to bring in some joy. And I want us to stay on this topic and also say that part of what my liberation has looked like in the context of a variety of different liberatory spaces, one of the ones that was most significant to me was I believe it was 2015 movement for Black Lives Gathering, and various other spaces that I just want to breathe in. I was doing fine for most of this, and everything that we're talking about here is important. And for me, a key part of liberation, speaking of having false binaries, is what I'm saying is, in addition to what is being said here, is anchoring continuously in what does liberation look and feel like from my ancestry of studying and taking time to accept and understand distorted white supremacy and nationalism, and also begin to disentangle that from what is internalized within me, and anchor in my ancestry, anchor in re-indigenized, indigenous and Afro-Indigenous strategies around change. I really love a quote from activist and leader and artist Ricardo Levins Morales, when he recommends and strongly encourages us to engage in work that is slow, deep, and irreversible. And so I just want to start off by saying it's so important, everything that has been said. And I think depending upon the sorts of medicine and activism that we engage with, part of what can help us engage in the work that we do need to do of reaching across lines of difference is hearing and learning about all of that, and also not necessarily making that as our home, and remembering that a number of us come from ancestries that are rich in relationship and that are rich in honesty and truth-telling, and speaking openly and clearly about what are our commitments, what are the ways that we can interact, how can we call each other in and be in relationship. And I'm saying this, again, not to counter any of the progress that y'all have made, but in terms to contradict the message that a number of us have received from systemic oppression that has been internalized within us, that frenetic pace is the pace at which we need to pace our work, as opposed to that's something that's happening that we need to deeply understand and balance acceptance with aspiration, and use that distortion, oppression, dysfunction to further clarify and sharpen our strategy, and yet still have that strategy anchored in ancestries, the Black radical project, Indigenous radical projects that we are deeply proud of. And so I want to further emphasize, I'm not bringing it in, I want to further emphasize and anchor any and everything I say from a place of deep centeredness, from a place of personal, which we can have different perspectives on, with deep personal clarity that the peoples and movements I am a part of are going to win, because I, along with other people, are not going to stop until we win, and that we are committed to continual evolution and listening in deep partnership and continually building out our toolkits so that we have the capacity to face the unfaceable, which is much of what Eric was talking about. Much of that is in our lineages and is work that we need to do together in community to come together and process what is hard so that we can stay in this for the long haul while being connected to our spirituality, to our peoplehoods, to our heritage, and to sources of knowledge that epistemicide and genocide has tried to strip away from us, and at times have, that we are reclaiming and never letting go of, and staying firmly tied and in steadfast relationship with as we move forward in ideally multidimensional, multifaceted movements that are growing consistently in our wise discernment around the actions, the courageous actions we need to take, and working in partnership, because this work is exhausting and is inherently dehumanizing, so that in the words of Julius Lester, great Black Jewish man, at times when we need rest, those of us who really need to take seasons or years of rest, we can do that. So I'm happy to bring it back to where we were, and I also just want to bring in that thread into our shared conversation. Okay.
Do you want to respond to that, Eric? Or?
I feel like I talked a lot, so I'm happy to kind of move into questions, and I always have something to say and I'll pipe in, but I like that centering. Who are we? What will we be doing when we leave this space?
Yeah, and to your point, which I love that piece of what does our joyous, empowered, loving, multiracial democracy look like? And how are we living into that now? And how does that feel sweet And what feels scary about that, and how are we reaching for that relationship, and working through what is hard, such that it's not some far off thing that we're fearing, but we are noticing, how is that living in me now? And how are we preparing ourselves for the road ahead? And it can look like a lot of different things, but how are we living into the beauty of what we are, of who we have been, and who we, with increasing confidence, know we will be? Such that as the road is inevitably difficult and adversity arises, we increase our capacity to alchemize whatever distress comes our way and leverage that in service of our dreams with increasing unapologetic clarity and conviction and love.
I think about this a little bit when I think about, so every once in a while I'll pick up a guitar and perform. I hesitate to say musician because I think that's a leap. But I like to perform. And when I get up on the stage, my body can't tell the difference between excitement and anxiety. I literally have to tell my brain which one I'm feeling, right? And the truth is that the white nationalist movement exploits that in our communities, right? Each and every day. Demographic change, right? Shifts bring that same kinds of sense of anxiety, or is it excitement? Well, it depends who's telling us that story. And so it just really resonates with me that one of the tactics, one of the tools, one of the strategies, right, is to really work with our communities and work with leadership to really help get our brains understanding what we are feeling, right, isn't necessarily something dangerous and bad. It's the narrative that's telling us that. It doesn't mean that's what's really happening amongst us and around us. And we don't tell those stories, right? We don't, you know, we turn on and we're watching the Walking Dead or whatever the latest apocalyptic tale that is telling us that what we are facing, right, is something filled with anxiety. And I think it's very, very dangerous in terms of the stories we tell about who we are in the moment we're in.
So just right before we turn to questions from the audience, I just want to ask both of you, in light of what you shared, April, you mentioned genocide, you mentioned epistemicide. You know, Eric, you talked about the project of white supremacy, the project of white nationalism as a cleansing project, anti-Semitism as a racial myth. Is there a sense that in fighting those projects, those myths, that joy is not allowed until victory comes, and that is one of the ways that these myths and projects dehumanize that often goes unnoticed?
Yeah, okay, that's, right, the goal is to convince us that not only are the people we're seeing not human, right, but that there is something not human about us as well, right? So the dehumanization, and it's why, I mean, it's interesting if you think about the white nationalist project, right, particularly over the last 30 years in this country as a backlash to the civil rights movement. What have been the points of attack by the white nationalist movement on American society? And much of those attacks have been in the very spaces, right, where there is some type of multiracial connections. Public schools, right? Professional sports, right? We look at the attack on Kaepernick, simply as, oh, folks were just mad that he took the knee, right? Again, we treat the other side as if they're not organizers, that they can't find points of organization and mobilization. Well, the truth is they probably look at the same data I look at. And if you don't know this data, I'm happy to tell you, most white men's first black friend is an NFL star on television, right? From watching Sunday football or Monday night football. That's the first point of emotional connection to the black community. And so if you're the right, you want to disrupt that point of connection. You want to disrupt public transportation, one of the few places in a segregated society where people come across. You want to attack housing desegregation. You want to attack all the points that may cause folks to come together, right? And to continue to cross lines of relationship, which we know diminishes anxiety. I have a friend who's a great organizer. You probably know them too. I won't say their name. They're a great organizer. And I bet you they clock hundreds of thousands of miles flying here and there. I happen to know they have a deep fear of flying. That's what makes this person, I'm picturing him right now. He's really courageous because he gets on flights all the time. And I asked him once, I said, what's the deal? And he said, well, I had to decide, was I going to be an organizer or was I done? And he said, I really wanted to organize. I love working with people and I love working with communities. So he said, so I went and saw someone who was like a coach, like I didn't even know, there's anxiety coaches, apparently. And the person said the secret is to overcoming your fear of flying is understanding you will never overcome your fear of flying. But what you have to do is learn how to manage your anxiety. And the way you manage your anxiety is by flying more, right? It's the repeated exposure, right, to the perceived anxiety that helps a person begin to manage. So imagine in a segregated society that's bred off of anxiety, right, of meeting the other. Think about when you've walked into a room where you don't know anyone. Think about that feeling, right, at the party or whatever, school. And understanding if you keep coming back into that space, right, you begin to become accustomed to the anxiety and you start to move on in different ways with your relationships and your lives. The white nationalist movement just seeks to exploit that, and disrupt it and disrupt it. So one thing that we can each do is to really go through the practice of breaking out of our own societal segregations. And that doesn't mean, you know, don't tokenize people, don't tokenize other communities, but understand that at the end of the day, segregation is the secret weapon of the white nationalist movement. It's what allows fear to grow. It's what allows othering to grow. Right? And it stops us from being able to put forward a different solution. It's not easy, and sometimes you have to fake it, right, in that space to kind of make it. You have to practice it. There's no rule book on what a multiracial democracy should look like. And sometimes that takes just going through the practice over and over again. That takes a lot of bravery, like my friend who I almost said his name like 3 times now. He's super courageous because he keeps entering inside that space. He leans in instead of leaning out.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. And I think I would add to that and talk about that in ways that feels kind of leading edge and also maybe not, especially in the Bay Area, I'm not sure, is like a fractal, like taking that down. And I think that that is true of systemic oppression in terms of people's internal landscapes, and a part of the impact from indigenous genocide, as well as sexism and various forms of oppression, is to distance people from a relationship with a subtle and intimate connection with energy, both in the world and internally within our own landscapes. And, you know, earlier you were speaking about there's so many thoughts going through my mind often. I'm like trying to navigate them all. But I wanted to bring up, related to something you said earlier about part of it is, in addition to, in terms of what we're facing, part of what we're facing in our country as individuals and as a collective is unreckoned, is unprocessed histories of harm that I think heavily impairs our capacity to move forward individually, in terms of individuals, families, intergenerationally, collective patterns, and that people don't realize actually with diversity of really effective interventions that can be healed. And so I would say that I think, in addition to what you're saying, I think it makes a lot of sense. I've taught people around that, and as I'm sitting there, I'm like, how does that relate to me as someone who's multiracial, who's lived in existence? And for me, I also have spent a lot of time thinking about, both collectively and individually, what is the brokenness that a number of us carry internally, where different parts, where we've been conditioned through schooling, through a variety of different settings, to partition parts of our living rather than letting things speak with one another and move more holistically. And as you said, in terms of externally in the world, that can look like a lot of different things, and for individuals that can look like a lot of different things, but frequently I find our movements and our efforts are undermined and fractured because of not just the collective fracturing, but also the way that maps down in terms of people's individual landscapes and inability and lack of resourcing frequently to look at what is difficult to look at internally and recognize that through repetition, through putting in the reps, as you were saying, having rituals, resources, circles, where on a weekly, at times daily, for me, basis, having an opportunity to work through what frequently is historic or something that's old that is impairing my capacity to show up as powerfully and as bravely as I can in various moments. And so, yeah, I think that that internalized oppression that can manifest in any number of ways, and in part it's a segregation of parts of ourselves, which I could further clarify or not, I think is something that can frequently, not, again, useful but not universal. I'm not saying this is everyone, but frequently we aren't given that resource, and I'm interested in collaborating with other people and helping to create that resource for people, for us to have those conversations. For me, it can look different for different people. For me, part of that showed up, countering that has showed up specifically in a specific multi-year body of work around my Afro-Indigenous coming home work and reclaiming parts of ways that I perceive, literally in some ways in a mystical way, of understanding my dreams, of understanding things that I'm feeling, of being able to attune my capacity to listen to internal, subtle messages that help guide me effectively in spite of the confusion that happens externally, and that guides me to face things that are difficult to face, that enables me to show up in ways that I, and frequently others who I mentor and coach, are unable to show up until they get that additional support.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes left, and if we haven't already, I think we're going to get into the hard part of the program somehow. And that's because I'm reading the questions, and I'm going to sort of summarize 4 or 5 of the cards that are in front of me, and do so in a way that I hope is constructive, and I hope is not only expressive of those who ask the questions, but also frames them in a way that will lead us to a good discussion. A number of questions center around what's happened after October 7 and a feeling of, or perception of, anti-Semitism in BIPOC communities or among BIPOC organizing surrounding what is happening in Israel and Gaza and so on. And so in light of what you talked about tonight, Eric, there's a question here about how to understand those dynamics in the current moment and how to approach them in light of what you discussed in terms of anti-Semitism and the anti-Black forces in this country being intimately linked. How do we disentangle what's happening as we speak right now?
Yeah. So I think to really, there are two narratives upon which to understand that. There is the white supremacist narrative, right, that talks about anti-Semitism in BIPOC communities as a way of trying to flatten, right, the system of white supremacy. Look, BIPOC folks are biased too, right? It's a get off the hook kind of thing. And this is a society that loves to get off the hook in terms of both historical and present day realities of white supremacy. So that's one narrative. Then there is the narrative of actually understanding how anti-Semitism functions. So the difference between the two is the first is used as a political positioning, right? The second is used as a way of understanding anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism was constructed, right, as a form of social control in Europe, not just a narrative, but how did it function as a social control? It placed Jews, right, as the buffer between the haves and the have-nots in a society, so that when the have-nots felt that lines had been crossed, the haves allowed them to take out their frustration, right, on the Jewish community, to put the blame and the brunt of that frustration. That is what functioned during the pogroms in Eastern Europe, right? It is what functioned in other parts of the world as well. Jews being used as the scapegoat. But you'd actually have to have an understanding of anti-Semitism to understand that that is how Jews are scapegoated, typically in these scenarios. So you have two things. I'm going to work on the second narrative. And if you understand the second narrative, what you understand is that an expression of anti-Semitism, right, within communities of color, not justified, is actually proof that anti-Semitism exists in a society. It's being used, right, as it was designed. The real question is, what do we do about that, right? And what we do about it is to understand we live in a society that hasn't discussed anti-Semitism much. I meet and come across a lot of folks in the Jewish community, right, who I can tell you were not talking about anti-Semitism 5 years ago, right? Including communal organizations who were telling me anti-Semitism was a thing of the past. And if it functioned, it largely functioned only within the US left, but primarily outside the United States, right? It was the events of Charlottesville that switched the clock. So first we have to do some humility. Those of us who should have been taking on and championing the fight against anti-Semitism weren't even acknowledging that it existed here. The second piece is that where resources were going around education around anti-Semitism weren't going to the most vulnerable in our communities. That is because of historical racism in terms of public education, who has access in our society, right? The folks who most needed to understand anti-Semitism so that they could be inoculated against it were the least folks to get that attention and get those resources. So in this moment, absolutely we're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism, right? More politely expressed by white folks, right, than folks of color who haven't had the practice of polite bigotry, right? The second piece is that it's being expressed because these stereotypes and caricatures, right, are not understood by most people in our society. And what we know is that pressure and bigotry comes out when it's under stress. This should be seen as an opportunity to lean into those communities, not to use it as a way of distancing ourselves. Well, I guess these folks are bigots, so I don't have to engage with them. That is a form of privilege that I don't understand. Imagine if I decided that I'm not going to engage with anyone who has ever said or done anything that was like anti-Black or caricature. I'd be talking basically to my dad and my mom and a few other, about 6% of the American population. It's unrealistic. The truth is that there is no left or right anti-Semitism. You don't hear me talking about Jewish anti-Blackness, right? What you hear me talking about is anti-Blackness in American society. There's no left or right. There's no Latino or Black anti-Semitism. There's merely anti-Semitism in American society and how communities and organizations and movements tap into it. And our job is to call it out, right? But calling it out, again, I want to warn folks, it's not about labeling people anti-Semitic. I think it's not useful to label people racist. It's more productive to talk about what is racist, right? And what do we do about it? And that's what I would share with the Jewish community right now. October 7th will be exploited by lots of folks who don't understand anti-Semitism and will stumble in caricatures. Okay, I went on too long, but I'm going to say this. In terms of October 7th, and I want to name what that is. We use it like it's some date, right? It is the date, right, where the evolution of the conflict in Gaza and Israel accelerated. And hostages were taken, missiles were fired, right? There have been military and sectarian violence that has continued since then. Tens of thousands of people killed, right? Hostages killed. What is happening there is horrifying. It's important to name what is happening there and not just label it with a date. The truth is under that kind of pressure, it's not surprising that anti-Semitism has taken off. We don't have to look at the Anti-Defamation League or CARE or Council for American Islamic Relations for data. We can look at public data. I can tell you without a doubt, anti-Semitic and Islamic phobic hate crimes are at record highs in this country. Political violence, record highs in this country, right? The shattering and the fracturing of the civil rights movement, the only buffer against authoritarianism, right, is under the most stress that I have ever witnessed, crumbling. Folks can't even come into a room to talk about how to protect the right to vote, let alone who they're gonna vote with. The shrinking of intellectual space, right? The banning of clubs, the shunning of students because they're Zionists or anti-Zionists or Jewish, Israeli or Arab, Muslim, Palestinian, people getting fired, right? The shrinking of public space, the right to protest and assembly. And I'm here to tell you that political violence, that hate crimes, that shattering of the Civil Rights Coalition, the shrinking of political space, that's not being done by the white nationalist movement. We're doing it to ourselves. We need to be serious leaders in this moment. This isn't about political positioning. It's not about using anti-Semitism or Islamophobia to score a better political position. It's our job as leaders to bring solutions. It isn't a game. People are dying in real time. This isn't about our own entertainment. I want to just say this. We're the ones who are mainstreaming in this moment the rise of hate violence in this society. It is not Trumpers. Imagine what they will do on the mainstreaming of that if they return the power. We have to be more responsible. We have to be more nuanced and thoughtful, and we need to do our homework. If we're to be serious leaders, we have to have a better understanding of Islamophobia. We have to have a better understanding of anti-Semitism, and we cannot disregard the Black Radical Project because we've decided that it's not a priority in this moment. It is the very thing that is allowing us to destroy it in real time. Take it seriously. Take this moment seriously. Anti-Semitism is real, but we can't use it to political position. We have to use it to bring real solutions. People deserve it.
We have about 2 minutes, 3 minutes left, but April, I have a feeling you have some thoughts on this question too. Would you want to?
I had a few spicy thoughts, although you brought that to a really nice conclusion. So I was like, I don't know. You know, I'm also, I just want to acknowledge that I see at least two, maybe there's others, prominent, brilliant Black Jewish women and leaders with whom I lead in this work. Rebecca Pierce and Shakina Larks, and I'm hearing their voices and thinking about their commentary and thought leadership about these issues, and they are here with us today, and I wanted to say that I'm sitting and speaking in solidarity with their leadership and the ways that we align and that we diverge, and we are part of a really powerful movement and effort forward. So I would just, I would want to add a few different points. I'm feeling spicy, so I wanted to bring in some spiciness. And say that, you know, it's interesting. I would agree with what you said about the Jewish community. Well, I don't know. I mean, because I'm as a person who's been an executive, it definitely, in terms of large universal patterns, definitely in the past 5 years, it's increased. And I would say, as a Black Jewish woman, that I've been hearing for years, like over a decade, I've been hearing questions within the Jewish community about the issue of Black anti-Semitism. And you spoke to this already really quite well. So some of the things I'm going to repeat a little bit about what you said, and also add on to it to say that while it's quite different in some ways, anti-Semitism is another form of systemic oppression. And it's always here. It can kind of get a little bit low below the radar. Some people have described it as functioning like an invisible guillotine where there are spikes that come, but it's there. So I both appreciate where people are coming from, but I roll my eyes a little bit when people are like, there's anti-Semitism. Yeah, of course. There's racism on the left. There's homophobia. Like, yeah, we know that. Like, and the sky is blue. Okay, well, welcome to the movement. That is how systemic oppression operates. In terms of, you know, I'm talking about some of these big concepts, and this is an opportunity to really get specific about one of them. When I talk about facing the unfaceable, part of what that looks like, for instance, within the Jewish community, as a Jew who's been working as a Jewish leader within the Jewish community, is for us facing the enormity and the terror of what anti-Semitism looks like, and that it is in the halls of our government. And with both the Black community and the Jewish community, and again, recognizing that there are a number of us who exist in both of those spaces, that it's easier to look at those who are closer to us and scapegoat them. And it happens in both communities in different ways, and it is a much better use of our time. And I specifically have an issue that has impacted my career that I just want to name about a pattern about women of color, specifically, leaders of color, and specifically women and femmes of color, being targeted with accusations of anti-Semitism repeatedly in a way that is to our Jewish community's detriment, while they are prominent national leaders. And it is terrifying to look at that. But it would be a much better use of our time to come together as a community and use our phenomenal internal organizing resources to say this is a terrifying prospect, and how are we going to counter the fact that a few years ago we had an explicit anti-Semite in the White House? Internally, it literally drove me bonkers that women of color were potentially and were losing their jobs when there were people passing and working toward anti-Semitic efforts who are passing legislation. And with a profoundly trauma-informed perspective, I understand that that is terrifying and highly re-stimulating for members of a people who have been targeted for destruction for millennia, and that is our task, is to look at we are a tiny group of people, and it is terrifying. But if we're going to be doing brave work, we might as well look at what's terrifying and then notice, wait a second, there's the Black radical liberation efforts. There are other communities who are also invested in fighting this. And we might have to face the pain of rejection we faced. We might have to face some internalized shame and regret about ways that we or our ancestors may have acted or not acted in the context of liberation movements, and face the unfaceable and look at that and work through that together from a place of dignity and love and accountability and profound commitment to ours and others' liberation. And that our only option, now this is my camp, of safety is through solidarity. And so we need to take the time to look at why that is legitimately terrifying for some of us. That it is an ancestrally proven best practice at times for us to isolate because I realize we're out of time, so I need to wrap up in a moment. I felt your energy, Brad. I felt it. I hear you. Thank you. That is some of the stuff that we need to face and look at, because I really love how J.J. Goldberg says it, that anti-Semitism says that Jews are this global power. That's not true. And as a community, lots of communities of color would agree, not from an anti-Semitic perspective, from a factual, rational perspective, we have a lot of communal power that we can leverage for change, that we can leverage for good in service to counter and fight anti-Semitism. But we're going to need to look in the mirror and face some decisions that we've made in the past individually or collectively, take account for that, and then say, this is a systemic form of oppression, and we want to put our lot in with other groups and work toward collective change, to work for collective liberation.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, and we first just want to say thank you to both of you for your insight, for your wisdom, for your courage, and for your passion, and just for discussing things. You talked about facing the unfaceable. In today's climate, it often feels like willing to discuss the undiscussable, and appreciate that from both of you so much. Want to thank all of you for being here, for listening, for engaging, and for great questions. We appreciate you being here, and that'll wrap up our event for tonight. Thank you very much.